Hi friends, how are you? And welcome to Crimes with Cole. So hello. How are you guys doing today? I hope you guys all are having an amazing day. I hope you're having an amazing weekend this far. And oh boy, do I have a story for you today. Now, before we get into today's case, this case is going to end up being in two parts because it is just filled with a lot of fascinating information. Why there are not a million movies on it, I don't know, but you will see why this was the murder trial of the decade. Probably the century because, my goodness, it's just... You will see. In today's case, we will be talking about a beautiful woman who is married to a millionaire. When he ends up dead in their luxurious oceanfront Miami apartment, everyone couldn't help but think it was a robbery gone wrong. Everybody loved this couple. Once the police started to investigate, they noticed there was something this beautiful woman wasn't telling them. But can good looks and a lot of money help you get away with murder? We're about to find out. This is the story of Candace Mossler. Candace was born Candace Weatherby. She grew up in the fields of Buchanan, Georgia in 1920. It's a small town 55 miles west of Atlanta. Now, her father, Lon, was a farmer and her mother, Lizzie, was a homemaker. Candace was the sixth child of 12. Candace's mother actually ended up dying when she was only 12 years old, giving birth to her 13th child. Now, her father ended up turning to corn liquor to cope with the loss of his wife. And at this time, Candace had to grow up. She had to start taking on more woman duties alongside her other sisters in the house, while the boys tended to more, the outside stuff and taking care of the fields and the outside duties. Now, Candace finished high school and ended up marrying a man when she was 19 years old in 1939. And Candace became Mrs. Norman Johnson. Norman was a family friend and a civil engineer, and 10 years older than Candace. The newlyweds settled down in Anniston, and a year later, Candace gave birth to a little boy, naming him Norman Jr. And as many women would dream to have a life like Candace, she herself dreaded the life she was living. She wanted more. She didn't want to be a homemaker like her mom. So she took it upon herself to volunteer when she could. Mostly with the United Services organizations, which, supported military. It was a military support group. So she and many other women would help plan and host parties for, the military, the soldiers, when they came home. And at one of these parties, Candace had met an Army officer named Winthrop Rockefeller, the son of John D. Rockefeller. I'm sure a lot of you know who Mr. Rockefeller is, but for those of you who don't, he was essentially an American businessman and philanthropist, and was one of the most, if not the most, wealthiest man of all time. He was doing pretty good for himself. Now, it is rumored that Candace and Winthrop had an affair, but it was never proven. However, it was proven and very obvious to everyone around how close the two had become. Ironically, Candace named her second child, who was a little girl born in 1943, Rita Rockefeller Johnson. So it would seem to be the two were almost too close for a married woman at that time, if you get what I mean. But Winthrop was sent overseas to serve, and Candace ended up moving down to New Orleans with her husband and her 2 children. Norman had gotten a job as an engineer in a shipyard, and like many beautiful, picture-perfect families on the outside, on the inside, Candace and Norman's relationship was falling apart. The two ended up divorcing, resulting in Norman moving out to Colorado and Candace staying in New Orleans with her 2 children. She was bound and determined to make a living for her and her children, and she did. She was set on being a fashion model. So she sent her 2 children to stay with her sister while she boarded a train to New York, where she herself would attend Barbizon School of Modeling. She found local gigs back in New Orleans, and when she returned, she opened up Candace Modeling and Self-Improvement School. In the school, she would give young girls, tips and tricks on how to properly carry themselves with confidence, style their hair, apply makeup, and overall how to be the ideal young lady. Because back in the day, how you presented yourself, how you carried yourself, appearance, everything was a big deal. Not like it is today. You did not leave the house looking like you just rolled out of bed, compared to today where a lot of younger people find it acceptable. But, society's expectations of a woman were a whole lot different than they are now. So appearance was everything back then. Candace had did the unthinkable. She had made a living for her and her 2 children. Now, it is rumored that she did a few other things on the side that were not so ladylike back, in the day, to make a few extra bucks. It is said that she was an escort and a madame for when the young soldiers came back home and needed, some extra loving and attention, if you get my gist. But nonetheless, Candace was heading to the top. She started getting involved in the city's art scene and even was volunteering with the New Orleans Opera. Now, as she was volunteering for the New Orleans Opera, she would offer to go get hefty donations from wealthy men for the opera. And she did. She did a great job at it too. Candace had something about her that men drooled over, and women did too. She did very well getting these donations for the opera. But she hit a bump in the road when the opera told her to go after New Orleans banker Jacques Mossler. Jacques had immigrated to Buffalo, New York when he was a young boy and eventually made his way down south to New Orleans. This is when he opened up a car dealership and became a, cut the corners to make a buck type of car salesman. And at the age of 21, he was arrested for grand larceny. Yes, so after serving a tour in the army, Jacques came back to New Orleans and sold his car dealership. He now started opening small loan companies. He started investing in insurance firms and banks and sold home mortgages. His small loan company was essentially like a buy here, pay here type of deal with kitchen appliances, selling them to customers with horrible credit and charging them an outrageous interest rate and, real quick to take back the appliances if a payment was missed. But, he was doing something right because Jacques soon became a very wealthy man. So back to Candace volunteering at the opera, she was told to go after Jacques due to his status of being a wealthy man. At the time, Candace is 27 and Jacques is 52, and she asked him for a donation. Like Candace, Jacques was also recently divorced from his wife of 30 years, with whom he had 4 daughters with. He wrote a check for $25 for the opera because it bored him. However, Candace did not. Like many people who had met Candace, there was just something about her that he couldn't stop thinking about. Now, weeks later, the two just so happened to run into each other at the zoo. In May of 1949, the two had tied the knot while they were on a trip to Fort Lauderdale. When they returned back to New Orleans, they packed their bags and they moved to Houston, Texas. This is where Jacques had built Candace the Mossler Mansion, and it consisted of a 3-story red brick design equipped with butlers, gardeners, cooks, maids, chauffeurs, and handymans. Like a handyman. A handyman for your mansion. Like, who needs that? But Candace did, and she got it. Plus a 7-car garage that was filled. That's a different car every day of the week. Candace, she was living the dream of every little girl. She quickly climbed the socialite ladder in Houston. She was just so kind and sweet and gentle, loving. She was soft-spoken and beautiful on top of it. She was constantly volunteering her time and writing check after check to all sorts of organizations. No one knew anything about her, but they just knew she didn't have a mean bone in her body, and she loved giving back to the community. She had a gift, Candace did. She was able to sweet talk anyone. And that's probably why she did so amazing at fundraisers for organizations. Her old skeletons in her closet came to the surface when word about her past in New Orleans and how she did some unladylike things for money came to the surface. Candace didn't care. She certainly wasn't the first woman who had a dirty past and wasn't going to be the last. Many of those Houston socialite women had secrets they hid. Some people just didn't care to go dig them up. In January of 1957, Jacques had called Candace about 4 children that had just lost their mother due to their father killing her. Candace jumped on a flight to Chicago, and those 4 children now had a new home with the Mosslers. They were later officially adopted, and Candace loved those kids. She gave those kids the world. She gave them whatever they wanted and more. They had immaculate playrooms. They went to drive-in movies all the time. They went bowling. They would go out to the family beach house alongside their ranch a lot of the times too. They even had a baseball field put in across the street so the boys could play baseball. Candace loved being a mother and thought life isn't complete without kids. And life was great for the Mossler family. Absolutely great. In 1961, Candace got a phone call from her older sister asking if Candace would allow her son, Mel, to come stay with them. He had gotten into some trouble went to jail, served his time, and was getting released, and just wanted him to stay long enough for him, to get back on his feet. Candace didn't hesitate to say yes. Of course her nephew could come stay with her. When he arrived, Candace had him his own room ready and a Thunderbird to drive. And Jacques gave him a job at one of his local businesses. He would be in charge of repossession of appliances not paid for on time. So he would go repo and bring the appliances back. Candace also had Mel go under 4 operations when he arrived, which included his tonsils removed, being circumcised, pinning his ears back so that they didn't, so that they would lay closer to his head, and his face being sanded because he had acne so bad. He had acne scars. A year and a half later, Mel was escorted off the property and forbidden to return after he was fired by Jacques. Candace would just sugarcoat it whenever someone would ask her, saying that Jacques just got mad because Mel was already planning to leave to pursue another career. Now, Jacques had gone to stay in the family's oceanfront Miami apartment for the opening of a bank in that area. Now, after Candace and her children arrived to the Miami apartment in June of 1964, Candace enjoyed spending time with her children, although she was getting awful migraines during the trip. They were so bad, she would have to go to the hospital at night to get an injection to help because they were just that awful. Like, they were just god awful. And, she took her kids with her, but they didn't mind. They loved spending time with their mom. She was a night out anyways, and they loved riding in her red Pontiac convertible. It was really cool to them. Now, on June 30th, Candace and the kids returned to the apartment after Candace had gotten one of her injections to find Jacques wrapped in a rug on the floor. It had seemed that someone broke into the apartment to rob Jacques, and it ended badly for him. After Jacques was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery, Candace and the children returned to Miami, and detectives got to work on this murder mystery. What had caught their attention was when it was rumored that Mel, in fact, was kicked out of the family's mansion, but by Candace and not Jacques. After house staff had caught Mel and Candace fondling with one another, that is when Mel had gotten kicked out. It wasn't because Jacques fired him. It was, in fact, Candace that kicked him out. And on June 29th, the night before they had found Jacques murdered, Mel arrived at the airport and purchased a one-way ticket to Miami with nothing but one briefcase. He was spotted at a hotel not far from Candace's apartment. There, he was at a local bar and was seen leaving the bar to only return at 1 a.m. Time Candace had called the police about Jacques, Mel was already at the Miami airport purchasing a one-way ticket back to Houston. Now, when detectives went to question Mel, he swore up and down that he was in Houston that entire night and went to the movies, but couldn't remember the movie he watched or even the theater it was at. Mel was arrested on capital murder charges. While detectives were searching Mel's office, they found photos of Candace and Mel and love letters from Candace, speaking in a way that aunts usually don't speak to their nephews in. And it wasn't long after that the police felt Candace was probably in on this too. This hit nationwide news instantly. I mean, people were driving past her house just in hopes to get a glimpse of Candace. Police were in front of her house directing traffic because of how many people that were driving by. But Candace wasn't at her mansion home. She was inside St. Luke's Hospital, suffering from a nervous strain. She had 2 security guards guarding her room at the hospital, and the one time that she allowed news reporters to come in and interview her, she laid in bed in her pink nightgown and her swollen blue eyes from crying and told them that Mel would never do such a thing, and it is absolutely absurd to think that she would have a love relationship with her nephew. Now, for the next year, Candace had moved to Rochester, Minnesota, where she rented adjoining apartments and was being treated consistently for her migraines again at the Mayo Clinic. She kept quiet and didn't do many interviews. And the few interviews that she did do, she stated that Jacques was becoming unstable in the last month of his life and receiving pink stationery letters from a man that was trying to blackmail him for $75,000. On the 1-year anniversary of Jacques' death, Candace and her children traveled to the tomb to place roses on it. She had hired a photographer to capture this moment, and then those photos were sent to wire services alongside a detailed letter from Candace's doctors stating that Candace was medically advised not to travel to her husband's grave for the mental distraught it would have on her. But Candace just had to be there on Jacques' 1-year anniversary. Remember, this is all having a long-lasting mental toll on her, and she has gone into complete shock over his death to the point that she needs medical attention. 1 month after visiting her husband's grave, Candace was indicted on capital murder charges alongside her nephew. The Dat County detectives said they found new evidence that supports that Candace and Mel had been planning to kill Jacques for years. All right, you guys, this is where we are going to cut off at part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, but in the meantime, let me know if you guys think that good looks and a lot of money can help you get away with murder. And then we're going to find out in part 2 if it does. So stay tuned. But let me know what you guys think so far. And until next time, please remember to be safe, and I will see you then. Bye.